So you want to play the original 1998 Resident Evil 2 on PC, not the remake and not an emulated version, the actual 1998 classic running nicely on a modern PC, but you also don't want to spend the next 3 hours messing around with some random folders, DLLs, compatibility settings, HD texture packs, Steam overlay fixes and controller fixes, and whatever else the internet decides to throw at you. Well, I've got good news for you. I've got the lazy person solution for you, and I'll say that with love because I'm probably the laziest person I know when it comes to this stuff. I love old games, I love modding old games, but if there is a way to make this process easier, cleaner and less painful, I am absolutely taking it. So today I'm going to show you what is probably the easiest way to modernize Resident Evil 2 Classic on PC, and I guarantee you it is less than 10 minutes, not counting download time obviously. So what are we actually using? The pack we're going to be using is called Resident Evil 2 Steam Enhancement Pack from MulderLand. Now, huge credit has to go to Mulder here because this is exactly the kind of thing the classic PC scene needs more of. You don't really get these sorts of things very frequently, and it's really nice to see somebody like kind of going out the way to do this sort of thing. You know, it includes the classic ReBirth graphical improvements, high quality FMVs, high quality audio, a 4 gig patch, safe crash fixes, Steam overlay fixes, and Steam input support more importantly. So what is classic ReBirth? Before we install anything, let me quickly explain what classic ReBirth actually is. Classic ReBirth is basically a modding compatibility patch for Capcom's older PC ports. For Resident Evil 2, it is built around the Source Next version of Biohazard 2, which was a Japanese PC re-release of the game. What classic ReBirth does is make that version much more usable on modern hardware. You've got better controller support and support for higher resolutions, you know, borderless windowed and fixes for Windows compatibility and such. And of course, better mod support. And it also doesn't unlock everything like the Steam versions by default do. For some reason, you know, the Steam version unlocks every unlockable in the game. So it's like, why even bother, you know? When you see the option between Classic and Classic ReBirth, here is a simple version. Classic is much closer to the original PC executable. It is more vanilla and more untouched, and mainly there if you want to add old school original PC stuff. Classic ReBirth is the original version most people should use. It's the modernized version with better compatibility essentially. So unless you have a very specific reason to use the old Classic executable, I would highly recommend using Classic ReBirth. That being said, we're pretty much ready to begin. The first thing you want to do is head over to MulderLand and download the Resident Evil 2 Steam Enhancement Pack, or GOG if you're on that platform. Now for this video I'm going to be using the Steam Enhancement Pack, and you know, once downloaded, run the installer. You don't need to do anything crazy here, just open it, follow the steps, and when it asks you for your game location, point it towards your Resident Evil 2 installation folder. The installer will then give you a list of available components that you can install in addition to the game. Personally, I would leave everything at default settings unless you know exactly what you want to change, such as languages or translation patches. At one point in the installer, you may be asked if you want to replace Biohazard 2 with Resident Evil 2 in the FMVs. That part is entirely optional. If you want the videos to say Resident Evil 2, pick yes. If you prefer seeing Biohazard 2, then pick no. Either way, it does not really matter for gameplay, it's just presentation choice. Now, the final part, and the completely optional part, which is modding controls. Now, this is completely optional. You don't have to do this. If you love tank controls, you can skip this section completely. And to be fair, tank controls are part of the original Resident Evil identity. The game was designed around them, and the enemy placements were designed around them too. And a lot of people still prefer these games that way, but personally, I hate tank controls. I respect them, and I understand what the appeal is, but I actually hate using them. So for people like me, there is a Nexus mod called Modern Controls Plus. This mod's made for Resident Evil 2 Classic ReBirth, and it gives you the same control style closer to, you know, the Resident Evil 1 HD remake or something like Onimusha 2 or Onimusha 1. So instead of classic tank controls, movement becomes more modern and camera relative. It also includes a quick knife feature, which is inspired by Resident Evil Deadly Silence, and to install it, all you really need to do is download the mod from Nexus, extract the contents, and place them into your Resident Evil 2 Classic ReBirth installation folder, which in this case should just be ReBirth. If you installed for the MulderLand Steam Pack, that should be the Just ReBirth folder inside your game directory. Then launch the game for the Classic ReBirth, choose the mod through the mod selector if needed, and you should be good to go. that is basically the hard part done. I'm not even kidding. First boot and recommended settings. When you first boot the game, you should get the classic ReBirth launcher or configuration menu. For resolution, my recommendation is 1280 by 960, or you can just keep it on full screen. The game, that keeps the game in a proper 4:3 aspect ratio while still giving you a nice clean image. You can also use full screen, like I said, but that is if you prefer. Just remember that this is still Resident Evil 2 from 1998. The game was designed around 4:3 images and fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. So, you know, these backgrounds are 4:3. They're not going to stretch and look nicely to 16:9. And, you know, there's also kind of nothing to show outside of what's already drawn. So this is not going to magically become, you know, a native ultra-wide experience. And honestly, I don't think it needs to be. It's fine as it is. But trying to force these games into widescreen can often create more problems than it solves, because the camera angles, backgrounds, and scene composition were built all around 4:3 in mind. So for now, we will stick with 4:3 and we make it look as clean as possible and we enjoy the game the way it was designed. Maybe in another 10 years, someone will somehow fully widescreen mod the entire thing perfectly, you know, add the missing bits to the pure rendered backgrounds. But for now, this is already a fantastic way to play, and I don't recommend you go out of your way to try and, you know, widescreen it or anything. It's quite simple, really. The original game is still being respected and preserved in its 4:3 aspect ratio, the fixed camera angles, the pre-rendered backgrounds, but the texture packs, the upscales and everything, it just gives it all a bit more clarity. In the original game, it was all a bit fuzzy and blurry. And, you know, if you like that sort of PS1 aesthetic, then, you know, you don't have to mod this in. It's, you know, entirely optional. But you've got a much cleaner setup now. You know, the UI is not pixelated or blurry. Everything looks much better and cleaner overall. And this is exactly what I'd want from like a remaster of this game, if there ever was to be one. Because these releases that Capcom did, I actually thought these were remasters, and then I booted the game up and I was like, wait a second, this isn't a remaster. It's like, you know, I kind of baited myself here through misinformation, so that's why I decided to make this video. Now, 60 FPS, there is one more thing that I wanted to talk about in this video, because after doing more testing, I noticed something that my overly frame time sensitive eyes cannot ignore. Resident Evil 2 Classic does not natively run at 60 FPS during normal gameplay. At first I thought it was just me. Steam Overlay was reporting around 60 FPS and the game looked mostly fine, but every now and then certain animations had this strange jank to them. Not broken and certainly not unplayable, but just enough for my eyes to kind of see something wasn't running smoothly. And because I'm apparently cursed with being overly sensitive to frame pacing, I started testing a few things out. I tried smooth motion with NVIDIA Inspector. I messed around with some settings. I tried to force something to happen and nothing changed. So this actually makes sense because the game is running through a translation layer, something like a wrapper. It is not behaving like a normal modern DirectX title where you can just throw driver level nonsense at it, you know, and it'll just work. It's just running through a wrapper, so of course, yeah, that's not going to work. This is where lossless scaling comes in. Now, I am not affiliated with the creator, and this is not sponsored. I'm just telling you what worked for me. Lossless scaling actually works surprisingly well with Resident Evil 2 Classic because the backgrounds are mostly static, and the camera angles are fixed, and there's not a lot of motion going on between scenes and moving objects on screen at the same time. So frame generation has a much easier time than it would in a fast, chaotic modern game, right? And the result is honestly very nice. It's not bad. That being said, it is not perfect. With lossless scaling enabled, I did notice a tiny bit of blur when moving around with Leon. It is very subtle, and honestly, you probably will not notice it unless you're really looking for it. But it is there. This is pretty much it. If you want to play the original Resident Evil 2 on PC in 2026 and you want the easiest possible way to make it look and run better, this is the method I would recommend. Once again, you just install MulderLand, you install the modern controls, and you're pretty much done. That is it. But just remember, the game itself still mostly running internally at that 30 FPS, and it is going to be stuck in 3x3, and that's pretty much it. Again, huge credit goes to Mulder and all the modders involved in this, and these old PC ports can, you know, easily be forgotten, abandoned, or left in a messy state forever. But thanks to the community projects like this, they are still playable, still improving, and honestly easy to enjoy than ever. So hopefully this helped. Now go and enjoy Resident Evil 2 and try not to get your ass whipped before you get to the police station like I did. Peace.